I'm Rebecca, 29, and I thought I understood what trust meant until my sister Madison's wedding announcement dinner last October. I was sitting at our family's dining table, nervously adjusting my bracelet as Dad stood up with a champagne flute in hand. Everyone, he announced with a broad smile, I have wonderful news to share. Madison and Jake are getting married next spring, and to help them start their new life together, I'm gifting them full ownership of the bakery. My fork clattered against my plate as the words hit me. The bakery. The same bakery I had invested $45,000 of my life savings into just 18 months ago, believing it was a family business venture that would secure all our futures. Before I dive into this story, let me paint the complete picture of how my family dynamics led to that devastating moment around our dinner table. I've always been the practical one in the Taylor family. As a certified public accountant at Morrison & Associates, I've spent the last 7 years building my career through meticulous planning and careful financial management. My apartment is organized, my budget tracked to the penny, and my retirement contributions maximized every year. Financial security became my obsession after watching my college roommate declare bankruptcy at 25 due to poor money management and family financial chaos. My sister Madison is 3 years younger at 26, and she's always been the creative dreamer Dad adores. While I was studying late into the night for my CPA exam, Madison was painting watercolors and writing poetry, pursuing her passion for the arts with unwavering family support. When she graduated with a fine arts degree and struggled to find stable work, Dad constantly reassured everyone that Madison just needed time to find her calling. Meanwhile, he'd frequently remind me that my accounting degree was practical and sensible, words that felt more like consolation prizes than compliments. Our father, David Taylor, owns a small but successful accounting firm that he built over 25 years. He's methodical, traditional, and has always had strong opinions about how life should unfold. In his mind, Madison represents creativity and potential, while I represent reliability and competence. He respects my professional achievements, but has never hidden his belief that Madison possesses something special that just needs the right opportunity to flourish. With me, conversations focus on practical matters, taxes, investments, retirement planning. With Madison, they center on dreams, possibilities, and artistic vision. Mom, Carol, tries to balance Dad's obvious favoritism, but she's never been comfortable with confrontation. She'll privately celebrate my promotions and work achievements, remembering every detail about my projects and client successes. But in family settings, she rarely contradicts Dad's focus on Madison's creative pursuits or questions his financial decisions regarding our futures. Then there's Jake Morrison, Madison's fiancé of 2 years. The son of a successful restaurant owner, Jake comes from money and understands business in a way that initially impressed Dad. When Madison and Jake started dating seriously, Jake began floating ideas about starting a business together. Madison had always loved baking as a hobby, creating elaborate cakes for family birthdays and experimenting with pastry recipes in Mom's kitchen. Jake suggested they turn her passion into a profitable venture. That's when Dad started talking about investing in Madison's future. The bakery location he found was perfect, a corner spot in the trendy Riverside district where foot traffic was high and rent was manageable. The space needed significant renovation, new equipment, and startup capital for inventory and marketing. The total investment required was $75,000, well beyond what Madison and Jake could contribute. 2 years ago, Dad invited me to lunch at our usual spot, Grandview Cafe, seeming unusually serious as he stirred sugar into his coffee. Rebecca, he said, his voice low and confidential, I want to discuss a business opportunity with you. Madison and Jake have found the perfect location for a bakery. It's a solid investment in a growing area, and Madison has real talent. We could make this a family business venture. I set down my coffee cup, intrigued but cautious. What kind of investment are we talking about, Dad? The total startup cost is about $75,000, he explained. I can cover $30,000 from the business account, but I need a partner for the remainder. Your financial expertise would be invaluable, and I know you've been saving aggressively. I thought about the $50,000 I'd accumulated over 5 years of careful budgeting and strategic investments. I'd been planning to use it as a down payment on a house, but Dad's proposition sounded promising. Would this be a formal business partnership? I asked. With ownership percentages and legal documentation? Dad reached across and patted my hand. Of course, Rebecca. This is a legitimate business investment. Madison would manage daily operations, but you and I would be the financial partners. Everything will be properly documented. Madison needs this opportunity, and your involvement would ensure the business side is handled professionally. Against my cautious instincts, I agreed. I transferred $45,000 to Dad the following week, keeping $5,000 in my emergency fund. Dad assured me that partnership documents would be filed once the business license was approved and the lease was signed. The understanding was clear. Madison would run the bakery. Dad and I would be the financial backers, and profits would be shared according to our investment percentages. For the next 18 months, I watched Madison transform from an uncertain art graduate into a passionate baker and small business owner. Sweet Dreams Bakery opened 6 months after our initial investment, and Madison threw herself into the work with impressive dedication. She arrived at 5 a.m. daily to prepare fresh pastries, stayed late perfecting new recipes, and built relationships with regular customers who began requesting her cakes for special occasions. I helped with the business aspects, setting up the accounting system, managing tax preparation, and reviewing monthly financial statements. The bakery was profitable within its first year, exceeding all our projections. Madison's artistic background translated beautifully into cake decorating, and Jake's business connections helped secure catering contracts with local companies. During this period, I continued living in my modest one-bedroom apartment, taking public transportation to work while Madison and Jake moved into a spacious 2-bedroom place near the bakery. I postponed my house hunting plans, telling myself the bakery investment would pay off substantially in the long run. Madison rarely mentioned my financial contribution to the business, and when customers complimented the bakery's success, she and Jake accepted credit without acknowledging the family investment that made it possible. When Madison and Jake got engaged last spring, I was genuinely happy for them. They seemed to have found both love and professional partnership, building something meaningful together. The engagement ring was modest, and they talked about a simple wedding, which I respected given their focus on growing the business. But I began noticing changes in how they discussed the bakery. In conversations with friends and family, Madison increasingly referred to our business and what we built together. When a local food blogger featured Sweet Dreams in an article about successful young entrepreneurs, Madison was quoted discussing her journey from art student to business owner without mentioning any family support or investment. The week before the wedding announcement dinner, I'd spent hours helping Madison prepare for a large catering order that would be their biggest contract to date. I stayed until midnight helping package individual desserts, then arrived early the next morning to help with delivery logistics. Madison thanked me for my help, but it felt perfunctory. Aunt Rebecca always helps with the details. The announcement dinner was held at our parents' house, the same dining room where we'd celebrated countless family milestones. Mom had prepared Madison's favorite meal, herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables, and opened a bottle of champagne she'd been saving for a special occasion. The table was set with Mom's good china, and fresh flowers from Dad's garden created a festive centerpiece. Jake's parents, Robert and Linda Morrison, had joined us for the occasion. They arrived bearing expensive wine and warm congratulations, clearly pleased about their son's engagement to Madison. Throughout dinner, they spoke glowingly about Sweet Dreams Bakery and how impressed they were with Madison and Jake's entrepreneurial success. "You two have built something really special," Robert said, raising his glass toward Madison and Jake. "It takes courage to start a business from scratch, especially in the restaurant industry." Madison beamed, accepting the praise gracefully. "It's been challenging, but so rewarding. We've learned so much about business and about ourselves." I smiled politely, though something twisted in my stomach at the phrase, "built something from scratch." The business had been built on a foundation of family investment, but that foundation seemed to have been forgotten or deliberately obscured. After dinner, as Mom served her famous chocolate cake, Dad stood up with his champagne glass. The room quieted immediately, all attention focused on him. Linda, Robert, thank you for joining us tonight, Dad began, nodding toward Jake's parents. What we're celebrating goes beyond Madison and Jake's engagement. We're celebrating the success they've achieved together, the business they've built, and the bright future ahead of them. I felt a growing unease as Dad continued his speech. When Madison first talked about opening a bakery, I knew she had the talent and passion to make it successful. Watching Sweet Dreams flourish over the past 18 months has been one of my greatest joys as a father. My hands tightened around my napkin as Dad conveniently omitted any mention of the financial investment that made Sweet Dreams possible. Tonight, I want to give Madison and Jake something to help them build their married life together, Dad announced, reaching into his jacket pocket. I'm transferring full ownership of Sweet Dreams Bakery to both of you, effective immediately. No debt, no obligations, no strings attached. It's yours to grow and enjoy as you start your family. The room erupted in excitement. Madison squealed and threw her arms around Dad's neck. Jake stood to shake Dad's hand vigorously. Jake's parents applauded enthusiastically, praising Dad's generosity. Mom dabbed her eyes with her napkin, beaming with pride. I sat frozen, my champagne glass halfway to my lips, watching my $45,000 investment disappear in a single sentence. Full ownership to Madison and Jake, with no mention of my contribution, no acknowledgement of the family partnership that had made the business possible. The room seemed to spin slightly as the reality sank in. Dad had just given away a business I'd helped finance, treating my substantial investment as if it had never existed. In everyone else's mind, this was Dad's generous gift to his daughter and future son-in-law. They had no idea I'd contributed nearly 2/3 of the startup capital. This is incredible, Mr. Taylor, Jake said, still gripping Dad's hand. We can't thank you enough for believing in us and making this possible. Dad basked in the gratitude and praise, accepting congratulations for his generosity while I struggled to process what had just happened. Almost half of my life savings, gone without acknowledgement or discussion. I excused myself to the kitchen, claiming I needed to help with dessert service, but really needing a moment to collect myself. My hands shook as I gripped the counter, taking deep breaths to calm the nausea rising in my stomach. Mom followed me into the kitchen moments later, her expression troubled. Rebecca, are you okay? You look pale. I turned to face her, struggling to keep my voice steady. Mom, Dad just gave away a business I invested $45,000 in. Did you know he was planning this? Her face fell, confirming my worst fears. He mentioned it a few days ago. I told him he should discuss it with you first, but he said it was his decision as the primary investor. Primary investor? My voice rose slightly. I contributed more money than he did. Mom glanced toward the dining room, where laughter and celebration continued. Keep your voice down, sweetheart. This isn't the time. When is the time, Mom? When would be appropriate to discuss Dad giving away my money? Before Mom could respond, Madison appeared in the kitchen doorway, glowing with happiness. Rebecca, can you believe it? Dad is giving us the bakery. We'll be able to expand, maybe open a second location someday. I stared at my sister, searching her face for any sign that she remembered my financial contribution. There was none, only genuine excitement about what she perceived as Dad's incredible gift. Madison, I said carefully, do you remember how the bakery was initially funded? She looked puzzled. Dad invested in it when Jake and I couldn't get a traditional business loan. Why? The casual dismissal of my contribution was like a physical blow. Either Madison genuinely didn't remember, or she'd chosen to forget the family partnership that had made her dream possible. Rebecca contributed to the startup costs too, Mom said quietly, earning a sharp look from me. I hadn't wanted to create drama during Madison's moment, but Mom's revelation couldn't be taken back. Madison's expression shifted from confusion to discomfort. Oh, right. You helped with some of the initial costs. But Dad covered most of it, didn't he? Some of the initial costs. My $45,000 investment had been reduced to a minor contribution in Madison's memory. I excused myself, claiming a headache, and left the celebration early. In my car, the facade finally crumbled. Tears streamed down my face as I realized the extent of my family's betrayal. This wasn't just about money. It was about recognition, respect, and the value placed on my contributions versus Madison's perceived potential. The days following the announcement were a blur of emotional turmoil. I called in sick to work twice, something completely uncharacteristic for me, unable to focus on client files while my mind replayed Dad's casual dismissal of my investment. I tried calling Dad multiple times, each call going straight to voicemail. His text responses were brief and evasive. "Busy with client meetings today. We'll talk soon." "You're overreacting, Rebecca. Family supports family." By the end of the week, I'd compiled a detailed financial analysis of my contributions to the bakery, including startup costs, ongoing business support, and my involvement in establishing the accounting systems. The numbers were stark. I had contributed more than 60% of the initial investment capital. When I finally reached Dad by phone, his tone was dismissive and impatient. "Rebecca, I understand you're upset, but this isn't appropriate. Madison and Jake have worked incredibly hard to make the bakery successful. They deserve to own it outright. Dad, I invested $45,000 with the understanding that I would be a business partner. You promised me ownership percentages and legal documentation." The situation evolved, Rebecca. Madison's dedication to the business exceeded all expectations. It made sense to transfer full ownership to her and Jake. Without consulting me? Without any discussion about my investment. "Your contribution was appreciated, but it wasn't the majority investment. The bakery's success is due to Madison's hard work and talent." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Dad repeatedly minimizing my contribution and emphasizing Madison's effort. He seemed genuinely unable to understand why I was upset about losing my investment without consultation or compensation. That evening, I called my best friend Sarah, a lawyer who specialized in business partnerships. After explaining the situation, her assessment was grim. "Without written partnership agreements, you're essentially claiming a verbal contract," Sarah explained. "It's possible to pursue legal action, but family business disputes are complicated and expensive. Your best leverage is probably social pressure and family relationships." "So I have no legal recourse?" "Not easily. The business was established in your father's name, and you voluntarily transferred money to him. Proving that it was an investment rather than a gift would be challenging without documentation." The legal reality was harsh, but clear. I had trusted family and now had little recourse beyond confronting them directly. Over the weekend, I prepared a formal presentation, similar to what I would create for a client audit. I documented every financial contribution, every hour spent on bakery business, and every promise Dad had made about partnership and ownership. If my family was going to dismiss my claims, they would have to do so while facing irrefutable evidence. I scheduled a family meeting for the following Sunday, sending a formal email to my parents, Madison and Jake. "I'm requesting a family meeting to discuss the bakery ownership transfer and my financial investment in the business. This is not optional." The response was immediate and predictably defensive. Dad called within an hour. "Rebecca, this is getting ridiculous. Family doesn't handle business this way." "What way should family handle business, Dad?" "By making promises they don't intend to keep." "You're being dramatic. Madison and Jake have earned full ownership through their dedication. And my financial contribution? Does that count for nothing?" The conversation ended badly, with Dad hanging up after accusing me of being jealous of Madison's success and unable to be happy for family. Sunday's family meeting was held at my parents' house, the same location where the announcement had occurred. I arrived with my laptop and a portable projector, setting up in the living room while everyone gathered with obvious reluctance. Madison and Jake sat together on the couch, holding hands and looking uncomfortable. Mom perched nervously on the edge of her chair. Dad stood by the fireplace, arms crossed defensively. "Thank you all for coming," I began, clicking to my first slide. "I've prepared a presentation about the financial history of Sweet Dreams Bakery and my role in its establishment." The first slide showed a timeline of the bakery's founding, with key dates and financial milestones clearly marked. Dad shifted uncomfortably as I clicked through detailed financial records. As you can see, I explained, pointing to a pie chart showing investment percentages, my contribution of $45,000 represented 60% of the initial startup capital. Dad contributed 30%, and Madison and Jake contributed 10% through sweat equity and initial labor. Madison stared at the chart, her face pale. Rebecca, I didn't realize. I knew you helped, but I didn't know it was that much. This isn't just about the amount, I continued, clicking to the next slide. It's about the promises that were made and the partnership that was established. I showed printed copies of text messages where Dad had explicitly discussed partnership agreements and ownership percentages. I displayed email threads where we discussed the business structure and my role as a financial partner. The issue isn't Madison's hard work or the bakery's success, I said, looking directly at Dad. The issue is that a business partnership was dissolved without discussion and without compensation for the partners. Dad's face was reddening, but he remained silent as I continued through the presentation. I showed financial projections, profit-sharing calculations, and market analyses that I'd prepared during the bakery's planning phase. My involvement wasn't limited to initial funding, I explained. I've provided ongoing financial management, tax preparation, and business consulting for 18 months without compensation, believing I was contributing to a family business. When I finished the presentation, the room was silent. Madison was crying quietly, Jake looked stunned, and Mom stared at her hands. Dad remained standing by the fireplace, his jaw clenched. Well, he finally said, that was quite a performance. But the bottom line remains the same. Madison has made the bakery successful through her efforts. Dad, this isn't about Madison's efforts. This is about honoring business agreements and treating family members with respect. Respect. Dad's voice rose. I've provided opportunities for both my daughters. Madison took advantage of hers. You've always been comfortable, Rebecca. You don't need this business the way she does. The familiar pattern emerged. Madison's needs trumping my contributions, my stability used as justification for being overlooked. I worked for my comfort and stability, I replied. And I trusted you with my life savings because you promised me a partnership. Madison finally spoke, her voice shaky. Rebecca, I'm so sorry. I honestly didn't understand how much you'd invested. If I had known. You did know, I said gently. We discussed it multiple times during the planning phase. But somehow my contribution became invisible. Jake cleared his throat. Mr. Taylor, if Rebecca invested that much money, shouldn't she have some ownership stake? Dad turned on Jake with surprising anger. The business is being given to you and Madison. Don't complicate things by second-guessing my decisions. The tension in the room was thick as family loyalties and financial realities collided. Mom finally spoke up. George, Rebecca is right. This isn't fair to her. Fair? Dad exploded. Life isn't fair. Madison has worked 16-hour days to make that bakery successful. Rebecca sits in an office pushing papers for other people. Madison deserves this opportunity. The mask was finally off. This wasn't about business partnerships or financial agreements. This was about Dad's belief that Madison's creative pursuits were more valuable than my professional achievements, that her struggles were more worthy of support than my contributions. Pushing papers? I repeated, my voice breaking. I'm a CPA, Dad. I have professional expertise that contributed significantly to the bakery's success. But apparently, that doesn't matter because I chose a practical career instead of an artistic one. I gathered my materials and stood to leave. I want my investment returned within 30 days, or I'll be forced to pursue legal action. As I headed toward the door, Madison called after me. Rebecca, wait. Please don't leave like this. I turned back to see my sister's tear-streaked face. Madison, I love you, but I can't continue investing in people who don't value my contributions. I do value you, she insisted. I didn't realize how much this meant to you. It's not about the money meaning something to me. It's about promises being kept and partners being respected. Jake stood up, surprising everyone. Mr. Taylor, I think we need to return Rebecca's investment. This isn't right. Dad stared at Jake in disbelief. Excuse me? If Rebecca invested $45,000 expecting a partnership, then we should honor that agreement or return her money. The business is being given to you, Dad said coldly. That should be enough. Not if it means taking advantage of Rebecca, Jake replied firmly. Madison and I can build something we truly earn. Madison looked at Jake with surprise and something that might have been pride. Jake's right, Dad. If Rebecca invested that much money, we need to make this right. The confrontation continued for another hour, with Dad becoming increasingly defensive and isolated. Eventually, Mom sided with Madison and Jake, insisting that returning my investment was the right thing to do. Dad finally agreed, but his resentment was palpable. Fine. I'll write Rebecca a check. But this family meeting ends our business relationship permanently. 2 weeks later, I received a check for $45,000 plus 18 months of interest. The amount was fair, but the relationships felt irreparably damaged. Dad barely spoke to me at family gatherings, treating me with cold politeness that was somehow worse than anger. Madison and Jake, however, surprised me. They insisted on starting fresh with the bakery, taking out a proper business loan to fund their operations rather than relying on family money. Madison called me regularly, working to rebuild our relationship and acknowledging how our actions had affected me. I think I convinced myself that Dad's money was the real investment because it felt less complicated, she admitted during one conversation. Acknowledging your contribution meant acknowledging that I hadn't built the business entirely on my own. 6 months after the confrontation, Madison and Jake's Bakery was thriving under their sole ownership. They'd expanded their catering services and were considering a second location. Most importantly, they were building something based on their own efforts and legitimate business loans. I used the returned investment as a down payment on a house in a quiet neighborhood near my office. It wasn't the grand investment opportunity I'd originally envisioned, but it represented something more valuable: financial independence that couldn't be taken away by family decisions. The house was a modest 2-story colonial with a small garden and a home office where I eventually started a part-time financial consulting practice. Working with small business owners reminded me why I'd been drawn to the bakery investment originally: the satisfaction of helping people build something meaningful. 1 year after the confrontation, Madison asked me to meet her for coffee. She looked tired but happy, her hands showing the calluses and small burns that came from daily baking work. Rebecca, I have something to tell you, she said, stirring sugar into her latte. Jake and I are expecting a baby. I felt a surge of genuine happiness for my sister. Madison, that's wonderful news. Congratulations. We want you to be involved, she continued. Not financially, she added quickly, but as an aunt. As family. The conversation that followed was honest and healing. Madison acknowledged the patterns that had led to our conflict: Dad's favoritism, her own tendency to accept support without question, and the family's habit of treating my contributions as expected rather than appreciated. I've learned to value what I've actually earned, she said. And I want our child to understand the difference between gifts and investments, between support and enabling. Dad and I eventually reached a careful reconciliation, though our relationship remained formal and distant. He struggled to acknowledge his role in the conflict, but he stopped dismissing my professional achievements and began treating me with something approaching respect. The experience taught me valuable lessons about family, money, and self-advocacy. I learned that keeping peace in families sometimes requires confronting uncomfortable truths. I discovered that financial generosity, without respect, is ultimately harmful to everyone involved. Most importantly, I realized that my worth wasn't determined by my family's recognition, but by my own knowledge of my contributions and achievements. The $45,000 investment had bought me more than a business partnership. It had purchased clarity about my relationships and my own values. 2 years later, when Madison and Jake opened their second bakery location, they sent me a handwritten invitation to the grand opening. At the bottom, Madison had written, "Thank you for teaching us the difference between earning something and receiving it as a gift. This one is truly ours." I attended the opening with genuine pride in what they'd accomplished. The bakery was beautiful, busy, and clearly successful based on their own efforts and sound business practices. Madison moved through the crowd with confidence, accepting congratulations for work she'd actually done and investments she'd actually made. As I watched my sister thrive in her chosen profession, I felt grateful for the painful confrontation that had ultimately strengthened both of us. Sometimes the most difficult family conflicts lead to the most authentic relationships. What started as a betrayal became a catalyst for growth, teaching all of us to value contributions appropriately and build relationships based on honesty rather than assumptions. The $45,000 investment had indeed paid dividends, just not in the way any of us had originally expected. Dad approached me near the end of the evening, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Rebecca, I owe you an apology," he said quietly, glancing around to ensure we weren't overheard. Watching Madison and Jake build this second location entirely on their own, I can see the difference. What they've accomplished here has real meaning because they earned it. I nodded, surprised by his directness. "Thank you for saying that, Dad. I was wrong about the original bakery situation," he continued, his voice heavy with regret. "I convinced myself I was protecting Madison, giving her opportunities. But I was really protecting myself from watching her potentially fail. And in doing that, I dismissed your contributions and your worth. It was the acknowledgement I'd needed for 2 years, arriving when I no longer desperately required it, but could genuinely appreciate it." "I understand why you made those choices," I replied. "But I'm glad we can all see the situation more clearly now." The months that followed brought unexpected developments. My financial consulting practice had grown through word of mouth, and I found myself working with several small businesses in various stages of development. The experience with Madison's Bakery, painful as it had been, had taught me valuable lessons about family business dynamics and the importance of clear documentation. One of my clients, David Chun, owned a small but growing restaurant supply company. During our regular quarterly review, he mentioned that he was looking for a business partner to help expand into online sales and wholesale distribution. "I need someone with financial expertise and business development skills," he explained. "Someone who understands both the numbers and the relationship side of partnerships." The opportunity intrigued me. David's company was profitable and well-established, with solid credit and a loyal customer base. Unlike my experience with the bakery, this would be a formal business partnership with legal documentation, clear ownership percentages, and defined roles. After 3 months of due diligence, contract negotiations, and partnership agreements, I invested $35,000 for a 40% stake in Chin Supply Solutions. The contrast with my bakery experience was striking. Every detail was documented, every expectation clearly defined, and every contribution acknowledged. Working with David reminded me why I'd been drawn to business partnerships originally. We complemented each other's skills effectively, with my financial background balancing his operational expertise. Within 6 months, we'd successfully launched the online platform and secured 3 major wholesale contracts. Meanwhile, Madison's pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Jake proved to be an attentive partner in both business and personal life. They'd hired additional staff for both bakery locations, allowing Madison to reduce her working hours as her due date approached. During one of our weekly coffee meetings, Madison shared something that surprised me. "Rebecca, Jake and I have been talking about what we want to teach our child about money and family. We've decided to establish a college fund, but we want to do it properly, with documentation and clear expectations." She handed me a folder containing investment prospectuses and savings account information. "We'd like you to help us set this up professionally, as a paid consultant, not as family doing favors." The request represented a complete shift in how Madison approached financial planning and family relationships. She was choosing to pay for expertise rather than expecting free assistance, creating clear boundaries between family connections and professional services. "I'd be happy to help," I said, genuinely touched by her approach. "And I'll provide you with a detailed contract outlining my fees and services." As Madison's due date approached, I found myself reflecting on how dramatically our family dynamics had changed. The painful confrontation over the bakery had forced all of us to examine our assumptions about support, contribution, and recognition. Dad had begun treating me as a professional equal, occasionally asking my advice about business decisions and actually implementing my suggestions. Mom had become more assertive in family discussions, no longer automatically deferring to Dad's opinions or playing peacekeeper when conflicts arose. Most significantly, Madison and I had developed a relationship based on mutual respect rather than unspoken expectations. We could disagree without resentment, support each other without keeping score, and celebrate successes without comparison. The baby arrived on a snowy March morning. Emma Rose Morrison Taylor, healthy and beautiful with Madison's artistic fingers and Jake's steady temperament. Holding my niece for the first time, I felt overwhelmed by love and hope for her future. "She's perfect," I whispered, gently stroking Emma's tiny hand. "We want you to be her godmother," Madison said softly. "Not because family obligation requires it, but because we genuinely want you involved in her life." The invitation felt meaningful precisely because it was chosen rather than assumed. As I looked down at Emma's peaceful face, I made a silent promise to help her understand the difference between earning and receiving, between support and enabling, between family loyalty and family respect. 6 months after Emma's birth, Chun Supply Solutions received an acquisition offer from a regional distribution company. The offer valued the business at nearly 3 times our initial investment, representing a substantial return on my partnership stake. David and I spent weeks evaluating the proposal, consulting lawyers and accountants, analyzing market conditions and growth projections. The decision ultimately came down to whether we wanted to continue building the business ourselves or take the financial security of immediate liquidity. "What's your instinct?" David asked during one of our final deliberation sessions. I thought about my journey over the past 3 years. The betrayal with the bakery, the confrontation with family, the lessons learned about trust and documentation, the satisfaction of building something legitimate and properly structured. "I think we should accept the offer," I said finally. "We've proven the concept works. Someone else can take it to the next level while we move on to other opportunities." The sale closed 2 months later, providing me with enough capital to purchase a larger house and establish a more substantial financial consulting practice. More importantly, it validated my business judgment and partnership skills in a way that felt entirely separate from family dynamics. As I signed the final sale documents, I thought about the different paths that had led to this moment. The betrayal with Madison's bakery had been painful, but it had also taught me to advocate for myself, document agreements carefully, and choose business partners based on competence and integrity rather than family connections. That Christmas, our family gathered at my new house for the first time. Emma, now 9 months old, crawled energetically around the living room while the adults prepared dinner and exchanged gifts. Madison and Jake had brought a small wrapped package with my name on it. Inside was a framed photograph of the original Sweet Dreams Bakery on opening day, with a handwritten note. "Thank you for teaching us that true partnerships require honesty, respect, and clear agreements. We're grateful for the difficult lessons that made us better business owners and better family members." Dad's gift was a leather portfolio with Rebecca Taylor, financial consultant, embossed in gold lettering. "I'm proud of what you've built," he said simply. "And I'm sorry it took me so long to recognize your professional accomplishments." But the most meaningful moment came when Mom pulled me aside in the kitchen. "Rebecca, I need to tell you something I should have said years ago. I was proud of you during that family confrontation. It took courage to stand up for yourself, and you handled a difficult situation with more grace than any of us deserved." As I looked around my dining room that evening, Dad helping Jake assemble a high chair, Madison nursing Emma by the fireplace, Mom organizing leftovers with characteristic efficiency, I felt grateful for the journey that had brought us to this place. The family conflict over the bakery investment had been one of the most difficult experiences of my life, but it had also been transformative. It forced us to examine our assumptions, challenge our patterns, and build relationships based on honesty rather than habit. 3 years later, Madison and Jake had expanded to 4 bakery locations and established a successful catering business. They'd achieved genuine success through their own efforts, and their marriage had strengthened through the process of building something together legitimately. I'd established Taylor Financial Consulting as a thriving practice specializing in small business partnerships and family business dynamics. My experience with both successful and failed family business arrangements gave me unique insights that clients valued. Most importantly, Emma was growing up in a family that valued honest communication, clear agreements, and mutual respect. At 3 years old, she was already learning to say please and thank you, to contribute to household tasks appropriate for her age, and to understand that gifts and earnings were different things. During one family dinner, Emma asked me why I didn't work at Aunt Madison's cookie store. Because Aunt Madison and Uncle Jake built that business themselves, I explained. I have my own business helping other people with their money. Like helping them count? Emma asked, her expression serious. Something like that. I laughed. I help them make good decisions about their money. Later that evening, as Madison was putting Emma to bed, I overheard her explaining to her daughter, Aunt Rebecca is very smart about business. She helps people be fair with their money and make good agreements. The conversation reminded me why the confrontation with my family had been necessary, despite its painful consequences. We'd all learn to value contributions appropriately, maintain professional boundaries, and build relationships based on respect rather than assumptions. The $45,000 I'd lost and eventually recovered from the bakery investment had been expensive tuition for lessons about family, business, and self-advocacy. But those lessons had shaped every subsequent decision I'd made about partnerships, investments, and family relationships. As I drove home that night, I reflected on how different my life had become since that devastating dinner when Dad gave away my business. The betrayal had felt like the end of the world at the time, but it had actually been the beginning of a more authentic relationship with my family and a clearer understanding of my own worth. The experience had taught me that family loyalty doesn't require accepting unfair treatment, that love doesn't mean silence in the face of injustice, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family is to hold them accountable for their actions. Most importantly, I'd learned that my value wasn't determined by my family's recognition or appreciation, but by my own knowledge of my contributions and my commitment to treating others with the respect I expected in return. The bakery conflict had ended, but the lessons continued to guide my decisions about business partnerships, family relationships, and the ongoing project of building a life based on honesty, fairness, and mutual respect. What started as a story about financial betrayal had become a story about growth, healing, and the possibility of transforming painful experiences into wisdom that benefits not just ourselves, but the people we love and the communities we serve.